All right, everybody, we are back for section 12, the final section of our research methods course, finally, where we're talking all about papers. You've done your research, you've got your results, now you need to write it up. But how? Well, there are lots of different kinds of papers, first off, right? As a student, college student, undergraduate, graduate, etc., you're going to be writing a heck of a lot of papers, right? So, usually, at least here in the United States, kind of the common pattern is you need to write a bunch of papers as an undergraduate student, but no like big major paper in order to graduate. In some universities, you might have something like that. Or if you want to graduate through an honors program, you might need to do kind of a pre graduation giant paper project. But then once you get your bachelor's degree, you might choose to go on and get your master's degree. And with a master's degree, not only do you have to take another couple years of classes, you usually also have to write what's called a thesis. And a thesis is usually just kind of a major paper, sometimes original research, sometimes not. But it has to be kind of much more advanced, usually longer, and more advanced and more complicated than probably anything you've written before, right? And then if you want to continue after your master's degree and get a PhD and become Dr. So and so, you need to write what's called a dissertation. And dissertations have to be original research, using all the techniques I've outlined in this class. And that's almost definitely going to be the longest, most complicated thing you've ever written in your life. Most dissertations that I've seen are essentially like books. They're hundreds of pages of really complicated, really in depth on some very, very small subject, right? Where you have to do all of the you have to pull a sample and gather data and analyze data and talk about statistics and all these things. And it really brings together all of the, not just research, but statistics and ethics and theory and all those wildly different courses that you've taken over the course of your student career. And all of that goes into that giant last final project, right? Mine took me, I think, about a year and a half. Or even 2 years from actually beginning the process to finally finishing. With both theses and dissertations, you often have to have a committee. And usually they will allow the student to choose their own committee, depending on whether it's a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation. Different universities have different rules about how large the committee needs to be. Sometimes it's 3 people, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6, really depends. You pick one person to be the chair of that committee, and then that committee is essentially your grader, and it's just kind of a pass-fail. Is this good enough? Is this thesis good enough that we are willing to grant you your master's degree? Is this dissertation good enough that we are willing to grant you a PhD? And they'll kind of help guide you through the process. They'll read every draft and suggest changes or additions or subtractions. And then when they think you're ready, they will schedule a defense. And you have to get up in front of a room, give a presentation about what your research found, and here's what my paper claims, and all these things. And then both the members of your committee and anybody else who chose to attend this defense gets to kind of pester you with questions. Well, did you consider looking at this instead of that? How exactly are you defining this term? Have you considered the effects of this other variable? Blah, 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 blah. And one thing that was told to me before I defended my dissertation, and it turned out to absolutely be accurate, is you're going to be terrified standing there in front of a room full of the experts in the subject, and they're going to be throwing questions at you, and you're going to start, at the beginning of this process, you're going to think, oh, they're trying to see if I know enough that they want to give me the title of doctor or whatever. But at some point during this process, you're going to realize, no, they're not quizzing you. They're asking you genuine questions because they don't know the answer and you are the expert in the room. And it's really at that point that you realize your dissertation defense is going to be successful and you're going to become, you're going to earn that PhD. And it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. I must say, the day I defended my dissertation was one of the happiest, most joyful days of my life. So hopefully those of you, everybody who's watching this who wants to get to that point, I really, really hope you do someday because it's wonderful. Other things, other types of papers, group projects, both as a student and as a researcher after you graduate, you're going to be doing group projects, right? You got to learn how to get along with people. You got to learn how to divide up, who's going to do what part, who's going to be in charge of this, and who's going to be in charge of writing this section and that section, and who's going to be in charge of presenting it, and, all those things. Those group projects can take many different kinds of forms, or you can do projects individually, but the vast majority of science is done through journal articles, right? Where you have to submit, you write a paper. In social science, they're usually roughly 20-ish pages. You submit them to a journal, and they go through the peer review process, right? So basically, if I have a research question, I decide I'm going to research it. I, gather all my data, do all my stuff, write my paper. I send it to a journal. They take it and they say, thank you very much for the submission. We'll be back to you in a few weeks. They take my name and any identifying information of it off. And then they find 3 different people who are experts in the particular area I'm writing in, right? So if I write an article about cyber criminals, the journal receives the paper, takes my name and university and all that stuff off of it, and sends it to 3 different experts in cybercrime and say, hey, would you please review this for us? Now, importantly, none of the 4 people involved, me and the 3 reviewers, know who any of the other 3 are. As the writer, I will have no idea who the reviewers are. The reviewers will have no idea who the writer was or who the other 2 reviewers are. So it's all done very kind of separate. They might know each other because it's, the academic community in any given small subset of research is a relatively small group of people. But they have no idea that this paper that they're reviewing in front of them was actually written by their colleague from the university just a few hours down the road. Once those 3 reviewers get through it, they kind of tear into it. They say, oh, there's this problem, and there's this problem, and there's this problem, and they do their best to kind of point out any little deficiency, any mistakes, any oversights. And then they give a recommendation to the publisher. And that recommendation can be one of 3 things. Accept, meaning this is really good, you should publish this. Or reject, which is this is very bad, get rid of it, don't bother publishing it, this stinks. Or the third one, which is by far the most common, is what's called a revise and resubmit, which means I've identified some problems, have the author fix these problems, then resubmit it, and we'll review it again. So then the journal gets these 3 reviews back, decides what to do based on those 3 recommendations, and then sends it back to the original author, either with accept or reject or revise and resubmit. Here's the comments we got from the reviewers. Fix these problems and please resubmit it. And then we'll send it out to 3 more reviewers and hopefully we'll get an acceptance at that point, right? So it's only after having gone through this process, usually multiple times, that any paper is published in any kind of reputable journal, right? So journal articles are kind of the pinnacle of science and research, and it's what we should all be looking at if we want to learn about any given scientific subject. And then, of course, there's applied reports, right? Different organizations, companies, NGOs, government organizations, whatever, they put out reports all the time about research that they've done, right? And that goes through a similar process to the peer review process, but usually internal to the organization, right? But so, the Death Penalty Information Center might publish reports every year about the death penalty and how much it's costing, and here's how many executions took place, and blah 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 blah, right? And those applied reports can be incredibly useful for different kinds of other researchers, right? Now, journal articles especially, but also things like theses and dissertations and such, anytime you're really doing your own research, it's going to follow this format roughly. Okay, there's not every paper is going to follow this exact format, but this is the general way to organize one of those papers, right? It begins with a research proposal, and this is before the researcher has gathered any data, right? This is prior to usually even IRB approval, allowing them to start gathering data, prior to any statistics being done, any data sets being generated. First, you're going to do your proposal. For that, you do an introduction, which is usually short, maybe a page, giving kind of a brief overview on the topic, why your research question is important, etc. Then there's the literature review, which is usually a pretty major section. And the point of the literature review is to inform the reader about the subject that your research question is about. It's to give them the context and the base of knowledge to really understand what your research question is, why it's important, and kind of what they have to know to be able to interpret any results you may have from your research question, right? So what research has been done before this? What have previous researchers found on this subject? What have they pointed out as problems in the current research, etc. But it's your chance to kind of tell the reader all the things that have come before now. So, scientists always stand on the shoulders of giants. This is where you describe those giants whose shoulders you're standing on. What work have they done that you're now wanting to advance that little bit? Then you have the methods section. And this is the kind of plan for how you are going to gather your data. What is your population? What are your definitions for all your concepts? Where are you going to get your sample from? What sampling frame do you have? How large is your sample going to be? If you're giving a survey, what are the survey questions? How are you going to add these 5 answers into one index or scale, right? So it's your plan for all of your, doing all the things we've learned about in this class so far, right? It's your plan for gathering all that data that you are then going to analyze once the research proposal has been approved. Then a lot of the research proposals ask you to separate out the budget and ethical issues. So budgets, when I assign papers to students, I used to ask them to kind of come up with a budget for their research, but I eventually stopped doing that just because budget estimations were way off in one direction or the other. Either they said, oh, this will cost $0 because it's all just freely available stuff. And I'm like, no, you're going to need all kinds of software to do analysis, and you're going to need this, and you're going to need like 5 graduate students to help you, and you're going to need all this stuff to answer your research question. You're telling me the budget's $0? That's ridiculous. Or they say something like, this research is going to cost $10 million. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, you can do that with a budget of maybe 50 grand if you want to get extravagant, right? So budget estimations, those are really something you kind of need a lot of experience in research to do. If I was a brand new researcher, I would ask a much more experienced person to help me come up with a budget. Like, show them my methods, show them my proposed research, and say, look, I just need your help trying to come up with a budget. What is this going to cost? How much of this am I going to need? How much of this am I going to need? What's that usually cost, etc. And then finally, there's ethics, right? What ethical issues might you run into if you actually do this research, right? Now, this is going to be a really bare minimum if you're doing like, secondary data that's already been vetted and already went through an IRB when that other person or group gathered that data. It's going to be relatively minor. But if you're gathering data, especially if it's from a protected class like prisoners or minors, you're going to have to write a lot about ethics and how you're going to make sure that people remain safe and how you're going to guarantee that consent is freely given, and how you're going to maintain confidentiality or anonymity or whatever. So kind of the more your data is going to come from new and vulnerable and diverse sources, the more you need to talk about ethics and kind of give the reader, kind of assure them that you've taken these factors into account and you have a plan to minimize harm and, all that stuff. Once you've done this, once you finish your research proposal, you send it to whoever's going to approve it. It might be, the IRB, obviously, your thesis or dissertation committee, the rest of your, if you're working with a team, the rest of your team. And once whoever needs to approve it has approved it, then you can start gathering data, right? You pull your sample, you send out your survey, you start measuring whatever you need to measure, you gather all your data, you put it into a giant data set, you send it through a computer program, you start doing your analysis, right? You get a bunch of numbers that computer program spits out. Now we need to finish this paper. And after we've done all that analysis, there's usually only 3 more sections to write. The first is the results. And this is, unless you're a very big science nerd, this is usually the most boring part of any paper. This is very dry. We found this variable increased from this value to that value after a period of 6 months and blah, 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 blah. But it's very dry, and it's just describing the numbers. It's describing the data. It's describing the statistical processes that were used and what the coefficients were and what the kind of the statistical significance or not and all those things. The really important part, I shouldn't say the important part. The entertaining part for the reader is probably going to be the discussion. This is where you as the author have to write out, okay, so what? What do those results mean? Does it mean that this program we've instituted has really helped lower crime? Does it mean that we found that this particular policy isn't doing anything and it's a waste of money? This is the discussion section is kind of the so what. What does all that mean? All that boring, dry results, numbers stuff, put it into context. What does it mean? Why is this important? What are the ultimate kind of lessons we're supposed to be learning from what you found in answer to your research question? And then finally, there's the conclusion, right? And this is just kind of the summation, the wrap up. And apparently there's some rule, I've never found it written down anywhere, but apparently there's some rule that says every conclusion section has to have a statement about how more research is needed on this topic. There has never been a single research paper I've ever found, and I've read a lot of them, that has said well, this finally answers the question. We no longer need to worry about this. We're done. We found the answers. Yay! Good job, everybody. We can move on to other subjects now. Just doesn't happen. So apparently every paper in the conclusion has to include, more research is needed here. And maybe even some suggestions for what that research might look like. Somebody needs to redo this research, but with this other group, this other sample or this other population instead, to see how that compares. So suggestions for further research is a very common thing for a conclusion. All right, so why do this? Why publish research? Why get all this information out there? Why generate all this new scientific knowledge? Well, number one, we want to advance science, right? We want to increase the amount of knowledge that's out there in the scientific community. And just because you can't see a reason for doing it or an immediate application of this research at the time it's done, doesn't mean it's not hugely important, okay? So back in the early 20th century, when Einstein's general theory of relativity came out, there was no immediate practical application for it. It was all highly theoretical physics that had no real world impact that developing the first airplane did, right? But today, we couldn't have GPS without that theory of relativity. So it wasn't until long after Einstein was dead that his research really had that particular real world impact of helping us with these navigation satellites, right? Um, so you never know how any given piece of knowledge is going to be used later on. That might be the key to somebody else figuring out something that is very important and has a huge real world impact, right? So just getting more information out, advancing science, even if it doesn't have any obvious real world impact yet, right? We also want to shape policy, right? Whether that's an organization making decisions about how that organization is run, or it's lawmakers passing new criminal laws or administrative laws or whatever. We want those decisions to be made based on the best possible information. So the more information we can give those decision makers who are creating and modifying these policies, the more those policies can actually have a chance to make the world a better place. We also want to organize social action, right? We want to get people to view the world through the lens of science so that they'll be able to kind of do all those things that people can do in a free and democratic society based on the best possible information, whether that's voting or protesting or organizing against an oil company dumping oil into the ocean or whatever, right? We want to shape society and have them view the world through the most accurate, responsible, fact-based lens that they can, so that they, as a free and democratic society, can go out and kind of, do their thing and create change in companies and organizations and politics and all those things, right? And then, of course, we want to kind of dialogue with research subjects. We want to understand the people we're researching and have them understand us and create a connection and create understanding and help differing groups of people see the world through each other's eyes just a little bit, right? That's a very important part of science and research and helping us all as humans understand people who are different from us. That's a big deal. Now, ethics. When you're publishing, when you're writing papers, when you're writing a book, when you're, doing a dissertation, there are specific things we have to worry about that are ethical issues that we need to be concerned with. Number one, always be honest. Never, ever, ever lie in your paper. The closest you should ever come to lying is withholding private information, right? So, withholding information to protect people's confidentiality. That can be bordering on lying and not being honest, but maintaining the confidentiality or anonymity is more important in that very specific case. So in those cases, you can kind of twist the truth a little bit, change names, change unimportant details about stories in order to maintain confidentiality or whatever. But otherwise, always, 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 always be honest, especially if you've ever had to change anything during your process. So if you started off with one method of measuring something and something happened during your data gathering and you figured out, oh, that's not going to work, we have to change this if we're going to move forward. So we're going to change this to this other thing. If you had to make a change like that, divulge it. Be very open and honest with that kind of thing, because if you're not open and honest with it, somebody will find out. And then they're going to point out how you didn't disclose this thing or you lied about this thing. And that is going to be a major problem for your career, for your research, all that stuff. Avoid plagiarism. We're going to talk a lot more about plagiarism in the next subsection. But plagiarism is essentially using other people's ideas and words as your own. You really, really, really need to avoid that. Next thing, maintain good records. Have, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Record everything and maintain those, right? If you have computer files, A, make sure you encrypt them so that other people can't access them. But B, make sure they're stored in at least 2 physical locations, right? So make sure all data you have, any video recordings, audio recordings, spreadsheets, databases. Store those in at least 2 physical locations. Store them securely, have good encryption, have good cybersecurity practices, etc. But, I would have things, say, on my computer at home, plus a copy stored in the cloud, and then maybe also another copy stored on a computer in my work office, right? There I would have it in 3 separate physical locations. So if anything happens, worst case scenario, my house burns down, I haven't lost anything, right? We need to make sure that all those records are kept and secured, and, so just in case, if you get accused of something 2 years after your article is published, you need to be able to go back and still have those records to be able to kind of defend yourself and say, no, that didn't happen. This accusation is false. Here's the record from the time that shows that that was false, right? And avoid lying with statistics. And lying with statistics is one of those things where you say something absolutely true, but in a way that really distracts from reality. And one of my favorite examples of this has to do with the SAT scores. So if you don't know, the SAT in the United States is a test that high school seniors, it's one of the options where they can take this test, and then depending on their score, they attach that to their applications to different universities. And the more kind of prestigious and hard to get into the university, the higher the score you need to have on this SAT exam in order to gain admittance into that university. So if you look at the state of Mississippi and the state of Massachusetts, it is an absolutely true state. This a little bit out of date data, but this was at least true 10 or 15 years ago. Might still be true, I don't know. But if you look at the state of Mississippi and the state of Massachusetts, the average SAT score in the state of Mississippi is higher than the average SAT score in the state of Massachusetts. That is an absolutely true statement. And if you just listen to that and kind of lead, your mind naturally kind of leads you to the conclusion that, oh, education must be better in Mississippi than it is in Massachusetts, right? If the students there are getting higher SAT scores, then obviously Mississippi has a better high school education than Massachusetts does. But while that information I just gave you is absolutely true, it also kind of neglects to tell you that only the top 10%-ish of students in Mississippi actually take the SAT. There's a huge percentage of students that don't take it because they know they won't score well and have no desire to go to college. Whereas in Massachusetts, almost every high school student takes it. So it's not necessarily that education is better in Mississippi versus Massachusetts. It's that only the really driven, academically inclined students in the state of Mississippi take the SAT, whereas in Massachusetts, it's basically everybody. So of course Mississippi has a higher average SAT score. That doesn't mean their education system's better. It just means that, their really good students are the only ones taking it. Okay, so avoid lying with statistics. Even if you say something that's absolutely true, it can still be lying if it is deliberately intended to lead somebody to a false conclusion, right? If you have sponsors, acknowledge them. If you got any kind of money for any reason to do this research, you need to disclose that, right? Whether it's a government grant or a university grant or, a company paid you or gave you some help in your research, you need to acknowledge that. Because once again, just like with the whole be honest thing, if you try to hide something, it will come out and it will be way worse than if you had just disclosed it right up front. And if you're doing a group project, discuss the order of names beforehand. So usually in the social sciences, kind of the most prestigious position is first. So that first author is kind of the position of prominence. And so the first author usually either goes to the person who did the most work on the project or kind of the biggest name in the field, right? The one whose name is going to make that article more popular. It's going to get it more readers, right? And then kind of the order of names is kind of dependent from there on, but importantly, before you go to publish it, probably even before you actually start the real research, you want to discuss with your team, okay, whose name goes first, whose name goes second, whose name goes third, why, right? And get that out of the way long prior to, okay, we've done all this research, we've written up this thing, we now need to submit it. What order are we going to put names in? You really want to make sure you have those decisions made kind of as far in advance as you possibly can. All right, it is now break time. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back in just a moment.